The first sign of trouble came through the quantum relay at 0347 hours, ship time. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the UES Defiant, watching the holographic display flicker with incoming data streams from the outer colonies. The coffee in her hands had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the hegemony's recent military buildup along the neutral zone. Admiral, we're receiving emergency broadcast from Kepler Station. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez called out from the communications array. His voice carried the tension that had plagued the entire fleet for weeks. They're reporting multiple hegemony dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace. At least 30 vessels. Sarah's heart sank. 30 dreadnoughts meant this wasn't patrol or show of force. This was an invasion fleet. She moved to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface as she pulled up the system map. Kepler Station sat at the crossroads of 4 major trade routes, its position making it strategically vital to both human and hegemony interests. Status of our forces in the sector, she asked, though she already knew the answer would be devastating. 3 frigates and a destroyer. The Kepler Defense Force has maybe a dozen fighters. Rodriguez's voice was barely above a whisper. They are requesting immediate assistance. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, calculating odd that made her stomach churn. The Treaty of Proxima had held for 4 to 7 years, establishing clear boundaries between human and hegemony space. Both sides had respected it, understanding that another war would devastate both civilizations. But now, with humanity's main fleet spread thin across dozens of systems, the hegemony had chosen to strike. Signal all available ships, she ordered. We're jumping to Kepler immediately. That's only 8 ships against 30 dreadnoughts, her tactical officer, Commander Wells, protested. It's suicide. Those are our people on Kepler Station, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the weight of command. We don't abandon them. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of hyperspace jumps and frantic preparations. Sarah's small task force emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system to find a scene from their worst nightmares. The hegemony fleet hung in space like a dark cloud, their ships massive and angular, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Kepler Station was already burning, its outer rings venting atmosphere into the void. They are not even trying to take the station intact, Wells observed, his voice filled with disgust. They are just destroying everything. Sarah watched the tactical display, her mind racing through options that all led to the same conclusion. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and too far from reinforcements. But as she prepared to give the order to attack, knowing it would be their last, something unexpected happened. The emergency communication channel crackled to life with a voice she recognized but had never heard sound so cold. President Martinez, speaking from Earth. All human military forces, this is Executive Order 77 Alpha. The Treaty of Proxima has been violated. Protocols are now in effect. Authorization code, Grandfather's Promise. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Grandfather's Promise wasn't just a code. It was a phrase her grandfather had whispered to her as a child, during those rare moments when he'd spoken about the silent war. She'd always assumed it was just family history, stories about battles fought before she was born. Admiral. Rodriguez called out, his voice shaking. We're receiving automated signals from everywhere. Deep space beacons, derelict stations, coordinates that aren't on any star chart. The tactical display exploded with new contacts. Dozens of them, scattered across the galaxy, all broadcasting the same message. Ghost Fleet acknowledging. Protocols confirmed. Beginning activation sequence. Sarah's hands trembled as she accessed her personal files, pulling up the sealed message her grandfather had left for her before his death. The one she'd never been able to decrypt, despite years of trying. Now, somehow, her command codes were unlocking it. His weathered face appeared on her private screen, eyes filled with a sadness she'd never seen before. Sarah, if you're seeing this, then the treaty has been broken, and we've failed to keep the peace. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. The message paused as more signals flooded in. Ships that had been lost for decades were responding to the activation codes. Vessels that officially didn't exist were powering up their reactors. And somewhere in the depths of space, things that should have stayed buried were beginning to wake. The Ghost Fleet isn't just a legend. Her grandfather's voice continued. It's our greatest shame and our ultimate weapon. We built them during the darkest days of the Silent War, when we thought extinction was certain. Ships that could think, weapons that could adapt, technology that pushed the boundaries of what should be possible. Sarah looked at the Hegemony Fleet, still advancing on Kepler Station, unaware that their violation of the treaty had just triggered something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. We won the Silent War, her grandfather said, but at a cost that haunts me to this day. We agreed to hide the Ghost Fleet, to pretend it never existed, because we were terrified of what we'd become. But now, granddaughter, the choice is yours. The message ended, leaving Sarah staring at a tactical display that showed impossible things coming to life across the galaxy. The first ghost ship materialized 3 minutes after the activation sequence began, dropping out of hyperspace with the silence of Predator. Sarah watched in stunned amazement as a vessel appeared on her tactical display, a sleek, organic-looking craft that seemed to bend light around its hull. No human ship had ever looked like that. "Admiral, I'm reading impossible energy signatures from that vessel," Wells reported, his voice filled with awe and fear. "It's like nothing in our databases." The ghost ship, designation UES Revenant according to the identification beacon, moved with fluid grace toward the Hegemony Fleet. Sarah opened a communication channel, her heart racing as she tried to make contact with something that shouldn't exist. UES Revenant. This is Admiral Chen, commanding officer of the Defiant. Please respond. The reply came not through audio, but directly into her mind, a sensation so startling that she gasped. The voice was human, but altered, enhanced somehow. "Admiral Chen, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the Ghost Fleet. We have been waiting for this day for 47 years. Sarah recognized the name from the war memorials. Captain Webb had been declared missing in action during the final battle of the Silent War, along with his entire crew. "Captain Webb, you're supposed to be dead." "Death is a luxury we gave up long ago," Webb replied, his mental voice carrying undertones of sadness and something else, something that made Sarah's skin crawl. "We volunteered for the enhancement protocols, became something more than human so we could protect humanity. Now we wait to find our children under attack." The Hegemony Fleet had noticed a new arrival. Their formation shifted, weapon systems powering up as they prepared to engage what they assumed was a single human vessel. They had no idea what they were about to face. The Revenant moved with impossible speed, its organic hull rippling like liquid metal. Sarah watched in horror and fascination as the ship seemed to flow around the Hegemony weapon's fire, taking hits that should have destroyed it but somehow absorbing the energy and converting it into something else. "My God," Wells whispered. "It's feeding on their weapons." The ghost ship's response was swift and terrible. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from points along its hull, each one finding its target with surgical precision. The Hegemony dreadnoughts, massive vessels that had dominated battlefields for decades, began to come apart at the molecular level. Their hulls dissolved, their weapon systems failed, their crews screaming across all frequencies as their ships became death traps. "This is impossible," Rodriguez stammered. "One ship can't do this." But even as he spoke, more ghost ships began to appear. The UES Phantom, a vessel that looked like crystallized starlight. The UES Wraith, its hull appearing to be made of folded space itself. Each ship was unique, as if built by different species, yet all carried the same haunting beauty and terrible power. Sarah opened her communication channel again, trying to reach Captain Webb. "Captain, you need to stop this. The Geneva Convention, the laws of war." Laws written by humans who never face extinction. Webb's voice cut through her thoughts. "We gave up our humanity to save it. We became monsters so our children could remain innocent. Do not presume to lecture us about morality." The slaughter in space was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. The Hegemony Fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just minutes before, was being systematically destroyed by vessels that treated the laws of physics as suggestions. Ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that rewrote the atomic structure of their targets, defensive systems that turned enemy fire into fuel. "Admiral," Rodriguez called out, his voice barely controlled. "I'm receiving communications from across the galaxy. More ghost ships are activating. The Hegemony Fleet's at Alpha Centauri, New Singapore, and the Vega colonies are all under attack. Sarah felt the weight of command pressing down on her like a physical force. Her grandfather's message had mentioned a choice, but she was beginning to understand that the choice had been made the moment the hegemony broke the treaty. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just responding to the attacks. They were executing a plan that had been prepared decades ago. "Captain Webb," she transmitted, "what are your orders?" The response came with a mixture of pride and sorrow. To protect humanity at any cost. To ensure that no alien species ever again threatens our people. To make them understand that we are not prey. The last hegemony dreadnought exploded in a cascade of brilliant light, its death throes visible even through the ship's filters. The Ghost Fleet moved through the debris field like sharks through blood, scanning for survivors, for information, for anything that might threaten their wards. Sarah realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a military response. It was the beginning of something far more terrible. The Ghost Fleet hadn't just been built to defend humanity. They'd been created to ensure human dominance. And now, after 4 to 7 years of forced slumber, they were awake and ready to finish what they'd started. "Sarah," came a new voice through the mental link, one she recognized from old recordings. "This is Admiral Thomas Chen, your grandfather. I'm sorry you had to see this, but the treaty was the only thing holding us back." Her grandfather was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive and commanding the Ghost Fleet from wherever they'd been hiding. The man who had raised her, who had taught her about honor and duty and the cost of war, had become something else entirely. "Grandfather, what have you done?" she whispered. "What needed to be done?" he replied. "What we should have done 50 years ago. The galaxy is about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was never our technology or our numbers. It was our willingness to become devils to protect the ones we love." As if to emphasize his point, reports began flooding in from across human space. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just defending. They were advancing, pushing deep into hegemony territory, broadcasting a simple message to every alien civilization in the galaxy. Humanity is no longer bound by the treaty. We are coming. The next 18 hours changed everything Sarah thought she knew about the galaxy. Reports flooded in from every corner of human space and beyond, painting a picture of warfare unlike anything in recorded history. The Ghost Fleet didn't just attack military targets. They systematically dismantled the hegemony's entire infrastructure with surgical precision that bordered on the supernatural. Sarah stood in the war room aboard the Defiant, surrounded by holographic displays showing the impossible. Ghost ships appeared at hegemony supply depots, manufacturing worlds, and communication hubs, crippling their enemy's ability to coordinate or respond. But what disturbed her most was the clinical efficiency of it all. No wasted motion, no unnecessary destruction. Just a methodical elimination of everything that made the hegemony a threat. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth," Rodriguez announced, his voice strained from hours of processing impossible information. "It's President Martinez." The president's face appeared on the main screen, but Sarah barely recognized a man who had led humanity through decades of peace. His eyes held a weight that spoke of knowledge that had aged him years in mere hours. "Admiral Chen," Martinez began, "I need you to understand something about the Ghost Fleet. They weren't just an experimental program. They were our response to intelligence we gathered during the Silent War. Intelligence that showed us what the hegemony really planned for humanity." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of intelligence? "The kind that proves the treaty was never about peace," Martinez replied. "It was about buying time. The hegemony has been systematically infiltrating human space for decades, placing sleeper agents in key positions, mapping our defenses, preparing for total extermination. They were going to strike within the next 5 years, when they finished positioning their assets." The tactical display shifted, showing a new overlay that revealed the extent of hegemony infiltration. Government officials, military commanders, even some of Sarah's own officers showed up as confirmed or suspected agents. The scope of the deception was staggering. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked. "The Ghost Fleet has been monitoring the situation since the treaty was signed," Martinez admitted. "They've been gathering intelligence, preparing for this moment. When the hegemony broke the treaty by attacking Kepler Station, they didn't just violate an agreement. They triggered a response that's been 4 to 7 years in the making." Sarah's communication implant activated, her grandfather's presence filling her mind once again. "Sarah, you need to see something. I'm transmitting coordinates to your ship. Come alone." The coordinates led to a location in deep space, far from any star system. Sarah took a small scout ship, leaving her fleet to maintain position while she ventured into the void. What she found there defied explanation. The Ghost Fleet's home base was a massive structure that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. Ships moved through dimensions that shouldn't exist, their forms shifting between states of matter that had no names. At the center of it all sat a vessel that dwarfed anything Sarah had ever seen, a ship that looked like it had been grown rather than built. "Welcome to the Nexus." Her grandfather's voice guided her as a scout ship was gently pulled into a docking bay. "Welcome to what we became." Sarah stepped out of her ship and immediately knew she was no longer entirely in the physical universe. The air itself seemed alive, responding to her thoughts and emotions. Corridors stretched in directions that her eyes couldn't properly process, and everywhere she looked, she saw the crew of the Ghost Fleet. They had been human once. She could see traces of what they'd been in their faces, in their movements, in the way they still smiled when they saw her. But there was something else now, something that existed between dimensions, between life and death, between human and God. "We volunteered," her grandfather explained as he approached. He looked exactly as she remembered, but his eyes held depths that spoke of experiences beyond human comprehension. "When we learned what the hegemony planned, when we saw the scope of their infiltration, we knew conventional warfare would never be enough." He led her through corridors that defied physics, past chambers where ghost ship crews existed in states of quantum superposition, simultaneously present and absent, alive and dead. We merged with technology that we barely understood, allowed ourselves to become something that could fight beings who treated entire species as resources to be harvested. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the revelation. "But the cost was everything," her grandfather interrupted. "We gave up our humanity to save it. We became monsters so our children could remain innocent. Every day for 4 to 7 years, we watched over you, protected you, prepared for this moment." They reached a vast chamber where the true scope of the Ghost Fleet's power became apparent. Thousands of ships existed in states of quantum flux, ready to manifest anywhere in the galaxy at a moment's notice. Weapons that could rewrite reality itself stood ready to defend humanity against threats that conventional minds couldn't even comprehend. "The hegemony isn't just another alien civilization," her grandfather continued. "They are servants of something older, something that feeds on the destruction of sentient species. We've been preparing for this war since before you were born, and now it's time to finish what we started." Sarah watched as tactical displays showed ghost ships advancing deep into hegemony territory, not just destroying military targets, but systematically dismantling the infrastructure that supported their masters. "What are you planning to do?" "What we should have done 50 years ago," her grandfather replied. "We're going to make sure that no alien species ever again threatens humanity. We're going to establish a new order in the galaxy, one where human interests come first, always and forever." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just defending humanity. They were preparing to conquer the galaxy. The treaty hadn't been broken by the hegemony's attack on Kepler Station. It had been broken by humanity's willingness to become something that other species would fear more than death itself. "You're talking about genocide," Sarah whispered. "I'm talking about survival," her grandfather corrected, "and about making sure that humanity never again has to choose between its conscience and its existence. The galaxy is about to learn that we are no longer the species that can be pushed around, exploited, or exterminated. We are the species that other civilizations will learn to fear." As if to emphasize his point, reports began flowing in from across the galaxy. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just fighting the hegemony. They were sending messages to every alien civilization, demanding submission or promising annihilation. The age of human diplomacy was ending, and something far more terrible was taking its place. The first alien delegation arrived at the Nexus within 48 hours of the Ghost Fleet's ultimatum. Sarah watched from the observation deck as ships representing dozens of species approached the massive structure, their vessels dwarfed by the impossible architecture that housed humanity's greatest secret. The delegation was led by the Ethereal Collective, a species that had remained neutral throughout the Silent War and had helped broker the original treaty. Their crystalline forms shimmered with barely contained energy as they transmitted their message across all frequencies. "We come seeking understanding." Their representative, a being called Harmony of Thought, communicated through harmonic resonance. The Ghost Fleet's actions have created panic across the galaxy. Civilizations that have never threatened humanity are preparing for war. Sarah stood beside her grandfather in the Nexus's command center, watching the proceedings with growing unease. The Ghost Fleet had moved beyond defending human space. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure of every major galactic civilization, regardless of their involvement in the hegemon's plans. "They are frightened," her grandfather observed, his enhanced perception reading the alien delegation's emotional states with inhuman precision. "Good! Fear will keep them from making the same mistakes as the hegemony." "This isn't what we signed up for," Sarah protested. "The treaty was about maintaining peace, not establishing human dominance." "The treaty was a lie." Captain Webb's voice joined the conversation, his enhanced consciousness manifesting as a shimmering presence in the command center. "We've intercepted communication from 17 different species, all coordinating plans to divide human space after the hegemony's victory. They weren't neutral. They were vultures waiting for the feast." The holographic display showed intercepted communication spanning decades, revealing a conspiracy that went far beyond the hegemony's infiltration. Species that had presented themselves as friends or neutral parties had been secretly preparing to exploit humanity's eventual defeat. Trade agreements that seemed beneficial were actually intelligence-gathering operations. Cultural exchanges had been cover for mapping human psychology and identifying weaknesses. "The Zentaur were cataloging our agricultural worlds," Webb continued, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal. "The Morphic Collective was studying our military doctrine. Even the Ethereal Collective was preparing to claim our technological resources after our extinction." Sarah felt her worldview crumbling as the evidence mounted. Every alien civilization humanity had trusted had been preparing for their destruction. The Ghost Fleet hadn't become monsters. They become the only thing standing between humanity and galactic extinction. "So what's your solution?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "Simple," her grandfather replied. "We establish a new order. Humanity at the center, other species as client states or vassal worlds. No more treaties between equals, no more trusting that other species will respect our right to exist. We become the dominant force in the galaxy, and we make sure that no one ever again plots our destruction." The alien delegation was brought to a conference chamber that existed in several dimensions simultaneously, their forms struggling to maintain coherence in the presence of technology that challenged their understanding of reality. Sarah watched as her grandfather addressed them, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had transcended the limitations of mortal existence. "You come here speaking of peace," he said, "but we have evidence of your species' preparations for humanity's extinction. We know about the resource allocation agreements, the territorial division plans, the cultural preservation protocols that would have kept a few humans alive as curiosities after our civilization's collapse." The alien representatives shifted uncomfortably, their forms flickering as they processed the accusation. Harmony of Thought's crystalline structure dimmed as she responded. "Those were contingency plans, preparations for multiple scenarios. We never intended." "You never intended to be caught," Webb interrupted, his consciousness manifesting as a presence that made the aliens recoil. "But we've been watching, learning, preparing. The silent war never ended. It just went underground while you planned our funeral." Sarah watched the proceedings with growing horror and fascination. The Ghost Fleet presented evidence of betrayal after betrayal, showing how every major galactic civilization had been positioning itself to benefit from humanity's destruction. The peace treaty hadn't been about preventing war. It had been about giving humanity's enemies time to prepare for final solution. "What do you want from us?" asked the representative of the Morphic Collective, their shape-shifting forms struggling to maintain stability in the presence of the enhanced humans. "Submission," her grandfather replied simply. "Complete and total submission. You will dismantle your military forces, turn over your advanced technology, and accept human governance of your worlds. In return, we will allow your species to continue existing as client states within our new galactic order." The alien delegation erupted in protests, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of fear and outrage. But Sarah noticed something else in their responses: resignation. They knew the Ghost Fleet's power, had seen what happened to the hegemony's forces. They were terrified of what humanity had become, but they were also calculating their chances of survival. "You're asking us to abandon our sovereignty," Harmony of Thought protested, her harmonics creating interference patterns in the chamber's quantum fields. "We're offering you the chance to survive," Sarah's grandfather corrected. "The alternative is what happened to the hegemony. Complete annihilation, followed by the colonization of your worlds by human settlers. Your choice." As the negotiations continued, Sarah realized that the Ghost Fleet had already won. The alien civilizations had no choice but to submit or face extinction. Humanity had become the very thing they'd once fought against, a species that dominated through fear and overwhelming force. But as she watched the proceedings, she also began to understand why. The evidence was overwhelming. Every major galactic civilization had been preparing for humanity's extinction, viewing them as a temporary inconvenience to be eliminated once the proper preparations were made. The Ghost Fleet hadn't chosen to become monsters. They'd been forced into it by the realization that the galaxy saw humanity as prey. The age of human innocence was ending, and something far more terrible was taking its place. But perhaps, Sarah thought as she watched the alien delegates accept their new reality, it was the only choice that allowed humanity to survive. 3 months after the Ghost Fleet's ultimatum, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Terran Hegemony Command Station, watching human ships patrol space that had belonged to alien civilizations for millennia. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. Humanity had become the very thing they'd fought against, but with an efficiency that their former enemies had never achieved. The transformation of the galaxy had been swift and absolute. Species that had submitted to human rule found themselves integrated into a new order that was both more benevolent and more terrifying than anything that had come before. Human administrators worked alongside alien specialists, creating hybrid governments that respected local customs while ensuring absolute loyalty to Earth. Those species that had refused to submit had simply ceased to exist. The Ghost Fleet's retribution had been swift and complete, entire civilizations vanishing between one day and the next. Their worlds were now being terraformed for human colonization, their histories preserved in archives that served as warnings to others who might consider resistance. "You're troubled," her grandfather observed, his enhanced presence joining her at the observation deck. His physical form was becoming increasingly fluid, the boundaries between his consciousness and the Nexus's systems blurring as he evolved beyond anything recognizably human. "I'm wondering if we've saved humanity or destroyed it," Sarah admitted. "We've become everything we once fought against. The old hegemony enslaved worlds through conquest. We're doing it through fear and overwhelming technological superiority." Her grandfather's response came through multiple dimensions of communication, his thoughts transmitted not just through words, but through quantum fluctuations that carried emotional context. "The difference is that we're doing it to survive. The old hegemony conquered for resources and territory. We conquered to prevent our extinction." Sarah activated her personal display, showing the intelligence reports that had been flooding in since the Ghost Fleet's activation. The scope of the conspiracy against humanity had been staggering. Not just the major civilizations, but dozens of minor species had been preparing for humanity's eventual defeat. Trade routes had been planned to bypass human space entirely. Cultural exchanges had been designed to identify and eliminate human colonies that might survive the main assault. "Look at this," she said, highlighting a communication from the Zentar archives. They were planning to preserve human genetic material for study, but only after sterilizing our entire population. They saw us as interesting specimens, not as sentient beings deserving of respect. "And now they see us as God to be feared," her grandfather replied. "The question is, which relationship is healthier for our species' survival?" The answer came in the form of a new report from the outer colonies. Human settlements that had been struggling to survive in hostile environments were thriving under the new order. Alien species that had once ignored human distress calls were now competing to provide assistance. Technologies that had been jealously guarded for centuries were being shared freely to ensure human approval. "The children born in the outer colonies will never know the fear we lived with," Sarah observed. "They'll grow up in a galaxy where humanity is respected, where our interests come first, where no alien species would dare threaten us." But at what cost? Came a new voice, Captain Webb consciousness manifesting in the observation deck. "Look at what we've become. We exist between dimensions, our humanity preserved only in memory. We've traded our soul for our species' survival. Sarah studied the captain's shifting form, seeing traces of the man he'd once been in quantum patterns that now defined his existence. "Do you regret it?" "Every day," Webb admitted, "but I'd make the same choice again. The alternative was extinction, and that was unacceptable." The philosophical debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. President Martinez appeared on the display, his expression grave but determined. "Admiral Chen, we're receiving reports of resistance movements forming in the outer sectors. Some of the submitted species are trying to organize underground networks." Sarah felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. "How serious is the threat?" "Minimal, from a military perspective," Martinez replied, "but symbolically important. We need to demonstrate that resistance is futile, that the new order is permanent." The solution came from the Ghost Fleet itself. Rather than deploying overwhelming force, they chose a different approach, one that would demonstrate their power while reinforcing the benefits of submission. Species that had been planning resistance found their worlds receiving massive infrastructure improvements, their populations given access to technologies that dramatically improved their quality of life. "It's more effective than fear," her grandfather explained as they watched the reports flow in. "Fear creates martyrs. Comfort creates compliance. We're not just conquering the galaxy, we're seducing it." The strategy worked with disturbing efficiency. Resistance movements collapsed as their potential supporters found themselves living better lives under human rule than they ever had under their own governments. Alien civilizations that had initially resented their submission began to see the benefits of the new order. Are we the heroes or the villains in this story? Sarah asked as she watched the ceremony celebrating completion of a new trade route that would bring prosperity to a dozen formerly hostile worlds. "We're the survivors," her grandfather replied. "History will judge us based on what we preserve, not on what we became to preserve it." As the ceremony concluded, Sarah received a final message from her grandfather, not through their enhanced communication link, but through an old-fashioned text transmission. The Ghost Fleet was always meant to be temporary. It read, "When the galaxy is secure, when humanity's future is assured, we'll fade away. The next generation will inherit a universe where humans are safe, respected, and free to choose their own destiny. They'll never know the price we paid, and that's exactly as it should be." Sarah looked out at the stars, at the vast network of human colonies and alien client states that now defined the galaxy's power structure. Humanity had survived, but at the cost of becoming something their ancestors might not recognize. The Ghost Fleet had kept its promise. They protected humanity from extinction. But in doing so, they transformed both their species and the galaxy itself into something entirely new. The age of human innocence was over. The age of human dominance had begun. And somewhere in the quantum depths of the Nexus, the ghosts of humanity's former selves stood eternal watch, ensuring that their children would never again face the choice between survival and conscience. The treaty with Earth had been broken, and the galaxy would never be the same.